Hi everybody. I'm going to continue talking to you about Jane Goodall. Remember I read you that story about her yesterday about, it was called Me, Jane, and she's the lady who studied chimpanzees. And she's really, really famous for it. You probably have heard of her before, but she's really famous for it. So Jane was a little girl. She was little. When she was really little, her daddy gave her I think she was a year and a half, her daddy gave her a stuffed chimpanzee, and and she named it Jubilee. And she just loved animals and was very curious about them from the very beginning. She was born in England, just like who else? Who else do we know from England? Beatles, right? Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of, you've probably heard of maybe the video Tarzan. It's a story about a man named Tarzan who lived in the African jungle or rainforest. And Jane got that book, and she got a tiny little book, and she loved that book. She loved it so much she read it all the time. And she would climb up her favorite tree called Beech, and it was a beech tree, if you'll remember some of these things from the story I read yesterday. And she would sit up there for hours and read Tarzan. And it was called Tarzan of the Apes, and chimpanzees can sometimes be called apes. She also loved Dr. Dolittle. Now, if you have ever seen, Dr. Dolittle is one of my most favorite movies ever, but it's the original Dr. Dolittle. None of this remade stuff. It's fascinating. If you can rent that, or if you see that anywhere on Netflix or somewhere, I would suggest watching it. It's wonderful. Dr. Dolittle was a doctor who could talk to animals. And so Jane was fascinated with these two people who could talk to animals. And Tarzan had a very good relationship with the animals in the jungle. He could also talk to them too. So she was just fascinated from the very beginning when she was little, when she was like 5. So she... one day, as you'll recall in the book, one day she really wanted to know how an egg came out of a chicken. So she decided to climb into her Grandma Nut's chicken coop. And I don't know if any of you have a chicken coop, or if you know somebody who has one. It's kind of like it's a tinier house than mine, way tinier. And she decided that she would watch. Well, when she was in there initially, the chicken came in and the chicken got scared because it saw her. And that's kind of what animals in the wild are like. Your cat and your dog aren't going to be afraid, but a chicken or a chimpanzee might be afraid. So she hid in the straw. There was straw in there. So she kind of hid herself in the straw. And then the chicken came in, and she had to wait for a while. So in the meantime, while Jane is waiting for this chicken to lay an egg, her mom and dad are looking for her, and they cannot find her anywhere. And they didn't think to look in the chicken coop. Why would she have gone in the chicken coop? That's where chickens go. So about 4 or 5 hours later, they called the police and everything. Jane came running across the yard towards her mother, covered in straw because she'd been hiding there. And she said, Mom, I finally know how the chicken lays the egg. I saw it. It was a miracle. She thought it was the most amazing thing. Now, normally, if you're missing for 4 or 5 hours and the police are called and you're worried, you might think your mom or dad might get a little mad at you. But Jane's mom, she knew that Jane was very curious. So she said, Jane, that is wonderful. Please tell me all about it. I really want to know what it's about. And that was great, because Jane really was very, very curious. And she was patient, because in order to be able to watch and study animals, you have to be very patient. So anyway, she had a friend who was visiting from Africa, and her friend gave her a ticket to come to see her in Kenya. And Kenya, let's see if we can see it on this map. Kenya is I believe, further up in the country. Oh, there it is. Okay, so here's Kenya. See, that's Kenya. And take note that this is Tanzania right here. So her friend lived in Kenya, and Jane went to go visit her. Let's see. So when she turned 22, this is when that happened, and Jane worked and worked and saved a lot of money so she could travel by ship, because in those days they didn't have airplanes. Well, they did have airplanes, but they weren't the kind of airplanes that we have now. So mostly going by ship was the better way, because the airplanes were the tinier airplanes that could fly. So she worked extra jobs to go to Kenya. And when she was there, she met a very important paleoanthropologist. Paleoanthropologist. That is a man who studies old human bones. His name was Dr. Louis Leakey, and he asked Jane if she would be interested in studying chimpanzees in the Gombe forest of Tanzania. And that's what I said to people. There's Tanzania, and then here's a closer part. The Gombe forest right here, and the only way you can get to the Gombe forest is by going up this river to it. So Jane could not even believe it. This was her dream. She wanted to study animals. She wanted to be in the rainforest just like Tarzan. She wanted to be able to talk to animals like Dr. Doolittle. So when she first initially went, she was about 26 years old, and her mom had to go with her, because in those days, if you were a single young lady, you had to be accompanied by your parent. You had to have a chaperone. It's called having a chaperone. So her mom went with her initially to the Gombe forest to study the chimpanzees. Well, it took a lot of patience, as I said earlier. And it took a lot of time. She started watching them from the peak, a really high spot up in a mountain nearby. And so she could see them way down below. And usually they didn't notice her up there, so that was good. So she gradually, slowly came down closer to them. But it was up there, she would use binoculars to watch them. And they were very afraid for at first, because there are a lot of people who aren't very nice to the animals in the jungle. They hurt them, and they capture them, and they sell them as pets. So she kept moving down a little bit at a time, getting closer and closer to the chimps. She wouldn't interact with them. She would sit very still. She would take notes. She would not say a sound. If she got hungry or had to go to the bathroom, she would remove herself. But a lot of times she would sit there for hours not moving. So this kind of built some trust between her and the chimpanzees. She'll be up these. So eventually, they started trusting her, and they started getting closer and closer to her. And they started getting kind of curious, like, who is this lady? Who is this strange-looking chimpanzee? Is what they were probably saying. I don't recognize, or the smell, because animals use their smell and their sight a lot. So she started following them once they got used to her, because they do move around. But she still stayed a distance away because she didn't want to frighten them. Eventually they got used to her, as I said, and she started naming them. And she started noticing that they had personalities, that some of them were funny, some of them were mean, some of them were very sweet, some of them liked to rough and tumble, like some of you guys. But one day, Jane made a really important discovery. She discovered that the chimpanzees were using tools. No one had ever seen this before from an animal. And what they were doing is they were taking a stick, taking the leaves off of the stick, and sticking it into a termite hill. Maybe look up termite hill so you know what it looks like. It looks like just a big mound of sand. And termites are kind of like, they're kind of like a mix between an ant and a roach. So they're kind of a bug. They're a bug. So they would stick the stick into the hole of the termite hill, and they'd pull it out, and there would be termites attached to the stick. And then they would take the stick and eat the termites. Well, the other thing people didn't know about chimpanzees is they thought they were all vegetarians. but because they were eating termites, they showed that they actually were, what is that called? An omnivore. An omnivore is somebody that eats meat and vegetables like most of us. So that was a really, really important discovery. And when Jane told Dr. Louis Leakey about that, he just couldn't believe it. But unfortunately, Jane did not have any education in science. So in those days, a lot of people said, she's never gone to school for science. How would she know what's going on? I don't believe her. Plus, she's a woman. Because in those days, which is over 50 years ago, a lot of people didn't think that women could be that smart. They didn't think women could be scientists. They didn't think that women could make these kinds of discoveries. I know, jaw drop, right? Because we know women can do everything that boys can do, right? Boys and girls can do everything, everything. Girls can do what boys can do, and boys can do what girls do, right? So it was really sad for Jane because this was a really, really important discovery. So she did end up going to college. She did end up getting a degree, and then they finally believed her, which is just silly. So Jane now is in her 80s, and she spends most of her time 300 days a year. There are 365 days in a year. So 300 days out of the year, she spends her time traveling around to people and working with people who are involved in her Roots and Shoots Global Youth Program. Roots and Shoots is about the environment because she had to step away from her studies with the chimpanzees because their habitat, as I talked about yesterday, was being destroyed. And that's the rainforest. The habitat was being destroyed, and they didn't have anywhere to live because the monkeys live in the trees and they eat the vegetation and they need the termite hills to survive. And so Jane started realizing that she had to get other people in to watch the chimpanzees, and they still are doing that today. So if that's something you want to do when you grow up, maybe your work watching the chimpanzees. Remember, you have to have patience, and it takes a lot of time. And she empowers young people to follow their dreams and do what their hearts tell them to do. She's very supportive and a wonderful speaker. And another thing that the reason she's like that is when her mom, when she was younger, and Jane was saying, this is what I'd like to be when I grow up. This is what I'd like to do. Her mother said, and listen to this, because I say this to you too, if you want to do something, you will have to work hard, take advantage of opportunities. That means things that come to you, or if you see an opportunity, take it, and never give up. Most of all, believe in yourself. Okay? I'll repeat that at the end because that's a very, very important thing to remember about you too. So Jane had one son, and they called him Grub. It was his nickname, Grub. And he got to live with her in the Gombe Forest too until he went back to England for school. Can you imagine living in the jungle? That would be fun. I mean, I think it would be fun. Although you might like living in your house better because you probably have to live in a tent most of the time. And Jane also talks about the planet and how we need to be taking better care of it. That's why the people are destroying the rainforest because they want to have cattle farms and they want to have crops. And once it's gone forever. And she's not happy that they're chopping down and burning down and bulldozing down so many trees in Africa. Those are the trees are the homes to the chimpanzees, and they need them to survive. And she's helped to bring about laws about stopping people from chopping down and destroying the rainforest and the forest. Here are a couple quotes from Jane Goodall. You cannot get through a single day without having an impact on the world around you. What you do makes a difference, and you have to decide what kind of difference you want to make. What you do makes a difference, and you have to decide what kind of difference you want to make. Very, very profound. Here's another one. Here we are, arguably the most intelligent being that's ever walked planet Earth, and with this extraordinary brain, and yet we're destroying the only home we have. That's the planet we live on. It's the only Earth. There's not another Earth. We can't go to Target and buy another planet. And we'll be talking about that next week. Each one of us must take responsibility for our own lives, and above all, show respect and love for living things around us, especially each other. Wonderful. So Jane Goodall and the Chimps. She is an amazing woman. I told you yesterday she is one of my heroes. She is in her 80s. She looks fabulous in her 80s. She has a kind heart. People say that when they meet her, she just has a really calming quality about her, that she's just a wonderful human being. And we could all aspire to be her. She is amazing. And the last thing I want to tell you is I want to repeat that quote one more time. Jane's mother said to her, and this goes for you too, all of you too, if you really want to do something, you will have to work hard, take advantage of opportunities, and never give up. Believe in yourself, just like Jane did. She was your age when she really started getting going about what she wanted to do with her life, and I know you can do the same thing. So for now, that's it. We'll have a little bit of a quiz in our next lesson, and I've got a few science lessons lined up for you too coming up. So take care. We'll talk to you soon. Goodbye.